6-year-old Eugenia Martínez Vallejo, squeezed into an uncomfortable but her only presentable dress, stood frozen at the entrance to the royal audience hall. The air was thick with the scent of wax, perfumes, and something else, medicinal, musty. When the heavy curtain was pulled aside, revealing a figure on a throne deep within the chamber, Eugenia's heart began to pound with such force it felt as if it would burst from her chest, like a frightened bird in a cage. The image was forever etched into her memory. A pale, disease-ravaged face with a disproportionately long nose that almost merged with his chin, and huge, bulging eyes framed by dark circles. She instinctively recoiled, bumping into the stiff brocade of a courtier's coat. Even knowing that before her stood His Catholic Majesty, Carlos II, the most formidable king of Spain, she could not believe that such a creature could sit on a throne and terrify a little girl to death. But what struck her even more was the icy, stone-like composure of those around her. The courtiers in their lavish coats and crinolines stood like enchanted statues. Their faces were fixed in reverent masks, as if what was happening was entirely normal, even a majestic spectacle. This contrast between her primal terror and their deadened courtesy only amplified her panic. "How plump she is!" The king's voice, unexpectedly loud and shrill, escaped his thick, slack lips. There was no malice in it, only a childlike, almost delighted curiosity, like that of a boy who had found an exotic beetle. "Have an outfit made for her, one worthy of her stature," he commanded, pointing at Eugenia with a bent, bony finger. The courtiers immediately began to nod and murmur in agreement. Eugenia's small, plump fingers convulsively gripped the edges of a tiny wooden crucifix she clutched to her chest. Its rough texture was her only real anchor. She recalled her mother's words, spoken through tears as they parted at the carriage. "Do not be afraid, Chiquita, at court they will care for you. You will live like a princess." But now those words seemed like an empty, cruel echo. A chilling terror that rose from her very core at the sight of the Monster King constricted her throat and paralyzed her body. This fear, like a sticky shadow, did not release her for many hours after the audience, turning her mother's promises into a bitter mockery of her new, terrifying reality. For Antonia de la Bodega, a woman of deep and unwavering faith, the thought of missing Sunday Mass at the parish church of San Martin in their native village of Merindad de Montilla was unthinkable. This was despite the fact that April of 1674 had brought her not just a pregnancy, but a true burden. Her belly was enormous, her legs were swollen, and every movement was an effort. And so, leaning on the strong arm of her husband, Pedro Martínez Vallejo, she made the agonizing journey step by step to the familiar church, her face beaded with sweat from the strain. Antonia closed her eyes, trying to focus on her prayer, but suddenly felt a sharp jolt from within. "It's starting," she whispered, and in her quiet voice, alongside the pain, trembled a pure, uncontrollable terror at the uncertainty and the public nature of what was happening in a holy place. Chaos, whispers, the help of women from nearby pews. And little Eugenia came into the world right there, within the sacred walls. This event was immediately interpreted as nothing less than a divine sign, an incredibly good omen. The midwife who happened to be at the Mass was named Eugenia. The newborn was christened in her honor. Thus Eugenia Martínez Vallejo was born. "A sturdy, true little Amazon," Antonia cooed, gazing at her swaddled daughter. And indeed, the infant was remarkably robust. The household nickname Chiquita stuck instantly. The girl grew not by the day, but by the hour, and her appetite was formidable. Antonia's own milk was catastrophically insufficient. A wet nurse had to be found urgently. The extraordinarily thriving child became a living advertisement for the impoverished Vallejo parents. People came from all over the region to marvel at this wonder child. "Good heavens, what a baby!" guests would exclaim, leaving a coin or a small treat. The family began to wonder if Chiquita might truly be their lucky star. By her first year, Chiquita weighed 25 kilograms, and by age 6, her weight had soared to 70 kilograms. For the poor Vallejos, she had become an unsolvable problem. The hungry girl devoured all their supplies. The rumors, however, worked like a lifeline. word of the extraordinary child from the province of Burgos reached Madrid and the ears of the young King Carlos II. He ordered her to be brought to him. The era loved freaks of nature at its courts. Dwarfs served as living toys for many rulers. But in Chiquita, the courtly clique saw something exclusive, a true Titaness of a girl. They foresaw a future for her as a jester. A couple of funny phrases, a clumsy dance, and the audience would be delighted, they anticipated. The organizer of this circus was the king himself, whose own physical form was the subject of whispers and fear. Carlos II, a product of dynastic degeneration, bore the stamp of numerous ailments. He walked with difficulty, was tormented by digestive problems, and his face was disfigured by a disproportionately large nose and abnormally thick lips. Until the age of 4, Carlos II remained non-verbal, and he only learned to read by the age of 10. A monstrously long tongue hindered his coherent speech, and his gigantic height, a full 192 centimeters, frightened even adults. It's no wonder that Chiquita, upon seeing the king, burst into tears of terror. A year earlier, the monarch had married a young French princess. It is said she wept at her royal uncle's feet, begging not to be sent to Madrid. Upon seeing her betrothed, the poor girl fainted. The irony of fate. This man, himself a victim of ridicule for his appearance, was now seeking a target for humiliation. Eugenia was made a court jester. Charmed by his own scheme, Carlos ordered 2 full-length formal portraits of her to be painted. She was deliberately given the nickname La Monstrua, a sinister label emphasizing her monstrous otherness. Thus, the unfortunate girl was turned into an amusing toy for the deformed king. The Spanish queen Marie Louise, the very one whose tears had soaked the floors of the French palace before her wedding, sank into a chasm of despair. Food became her solace. The courtiers who fed on others' pain like gossip immediately began to jest. Soon, La Monstrua will have a rival. Subsequently, many romantic and scandalous rumors were invented about Eugenia. Of secret lovers, of passionate admirers at court. The harsh reality, however, was far more prosaic and tragic. Authentic documents about her personal life have barely survived. What is known for certain is that her gigantic body, burdened by illness, could barely move through the endless palace galleries. She was constantly tormented by severe shortness of breath. Every step was an immense effort. The king, finding a special sadistic pleasure in her humiliation, regularly forced her to dance for the amusement of his audience. Her movements were clumsy, absurd, and full of agony, which invariably drove Carlos II to fits of hysterical, convulsive laughter. As a jester, as a living caricature of herself, she performed her role flawlessly, eliciting the required laughter at the cost of her own dignity. The death of Queen Marie Louise from a stroke in 1689 only briefly altered the palace rhythm. A replacement was immediately found for Carlos II, a second young wife, Maria Anna of Neuburg, although no one had any illusions about the king's ability to fulfill his marital duties or produce an heir. And poor Chiquita had to dance once again, this time before a new, even more frightened and alienated young queen, whose terror of her husband and the entire situation was perhaps even deeper than that of the first. Formally, she had advantages. She was given luxurious dresses of expensive silks and velvets, although tailoring them for such a figure was no easy task. Special, sturdy shoes were custom-made for her. Could this be called happiness? For a peasant girl from a poor, God-forsaken village in the province of Burgos, undoubtedly, yes. Her position as a court curiosity provided certain privileges, a special, albeit humiliating, status, a roof over her head, abundant food, which was vitally necessary, and even the rare, dangerous opportunity to sometimes talk back to the king within permitted bounds. After all, this was part of her job as a fool. However, her monstrous size and insatiable appetite were not simply the result of gluttony or laziness. Modern medical scientists are almost certain that Eugenia suffered from a rare genetic disorder, Prader-Willi syndrome, which causes pathological obesity, low muscle tone, and a constant feeling of hunger. She died in 1699 at the young age of just 25 or 26, likely from complications caused by her illness and difficult life. A year later, in November of 1700, her tormentor, King Carlos II, followed her. His death without an heir brought an end to the Spanish branch of the Habsburgs and triggered the War of the Spanish Succession. La Monstrua. It is under this cruel, contemptuous label, given to her by the courtiers solely because of her peasant origins and, in their eyes, monstrous appearance, that she entered the historical record. And how was the king respectfully addressed, whose own appearance and physical defects could have drawn crowds of onlookers with far greater success than the sight of the unfortunate Chiquita? Oh, here the full force of hypocrisy and courtly gloss came into play. He was elegantly, with a hint at supernatural causes for his condition, as if he were enchanted, nicknamed the Bewitched, El Hechizado. To call him openly deformed or even ugly, the tongue of not even the bravest courtier or chronicler would have dared. Dynastic conventions, false nobility, and the fear of offending majesty proved immeasurably more important than the simple, obvious truth. History has forever cemented the peasant girl as the monster, and the deformed king as the bewitched, a bitter monument to human hypocrisy.